Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
If you were with me last week for episode 572, which released on February 21st, I talked about a simple life hack to improve relationship. I was talking about something I saw in a newsletter from Tim Scher. Check out that episode. The reason I mentioned that is that there is somebody else that I have interviewed, somebody else that I know that I get their newsletter. I try to support people who are on this podcast. I buy their books, try to subscribe to their newsletters. One of the wonderful things about podcasting, other than meeting great people and being connected to opportunities in business, is just the opportunity to learn from people. So at any rate, I got another newsletter. This one's from Michael Roderick, and Michael Roderick was on my episode, on my podcast, episode 455, which came out on March 30th, 2022, and the title of the episode is How to Become a Referable Brand. Michael was a high school math teacher, went on to be a producer on Broadway, and now runs a consultancy helping people get connected. He has got a podcast out there that he does called the Access to Anyone podcast. If you want to get his newsletter, simply go to his website, smallpondenterprises.com. I will put that in the show note, but you go to that website and there'll be a pop-up that'll allow you to subscribe to his newsletter. It comes out every day. It's really short. It's an easy read. Appreciate the time he puts into it and the material he puts out. I read it. I respond to him from time to time. Hey, that was great. But there was one that came out today that was really good. And there's a lesson in there for all of us. Yeah, I won't read the newsletter to you, but I'll certainly paraphrase and share my thoughts on it or my own experiences. But the title of the newsletter was called The Hidden Investor. And what he does in there, he talks about early on when he was in his Broadway show producing career, he needed to find investors. I mean, if you stop and think about a Broadway show, it takes money to put that on. So, you really need to stop and think about all that goes into it. You need to certainly rent space, rent a hall. You need to hire actors and all the staff, all the support that goes with it, and costumes and promotion, and all that money needs to be there on the front end, right? Your actors aren't going to learn things, learn the scripts, and go through all the rehearsals and whatnot for free. For a payment, maybe some other time, they want to be paid. They want to be paid up front. So you need investors. Okay, so that's what part of what Michael did was he went out and he found investors for these shows, and he shares in this newsletter that what he would do to get people to invest he would go to Broadway investors, people who are known to have invested. And to me, it makes total sense. That's what a lot of people would suggest. But what ended up happening with a lot of those is that he would sit down with these people and they would ask, well, how many shows have you done? How much money have you raised? Kind of kicking the tire, testing him out. Well, he's relatively new. Needless to say, he didn't get a lot of money from that. But then, as he puts it, something really wacky happened. He was at a Christmas party, and he was talking about the show that he was trying to raise money for, and someone overheard him in this conversation and just kind of interrupted and said, tell me more. I'd be very interested. How does the process work? What do you invest? How do you, and just went on and on, answered a lot of questions, and he the next week he got a check, and he said they never once asked me how much money I had raised or the other shows I'd worked on. They're just curious about the process. How does it all work? So on and so forth. And the what he says here is they weren't in the industry. They didn't have all the trappings. They were somebody new. And from that point forward, he stopped reaching out to Broadway investors to find investors and started going to gatherings that really had nothing to do with Broadway. The list of things he mentions here are tech events, finance gatherings, sporting events, charity events, and he would just meet people and talk about his Broadway shows. I mean, he was out there networking and learning about people. I'm sure he wasn't a walking billboard or had a sandwich board saying looking for money, but he was just out there doing it the right way. And this is part of what Michael Roderick does with his clients and helping them. And that's where he found investors. He found investors in the most unlikely place. And it totally resonated with me, that whole story, because for those who know, I franchise AmSpirit Business Connections, and I've been franchising since, I think, 2007, 2008, somewhere in that time frame. I think my first franchise was sold in 2007. And when you start doing it, everyone's like, oh, you need to talk to franchise consultants. You need to talk to franchise brokers. So that's what I did for the better part of maybe almost a decade. I remember going home and being so excited and talking to my wife about, I met a franchise broker today, knocking on the door. This is going to happen. Hey, I got a list of franchise brokers. I got all these people to contact, and just lists. And hey, there's an expo. There's a trade expo for franchise brokers or for franchise for franchisors, and I can put up a booth and I can meet all these brokers. There'll be tons of brokers there. I'll meet all these people. Sent hundreds of emails, individual emails, giving people information just about, I would share information about networking and then work in there things about AmSpirit Business Connections. Or sometimes I would just send stuff about AmSpirit Business Connections. And I struggled. I went to an expo in Vegas. I went to one in Orlando. I went to one in Nashville. I'm trying to think where else I was. Going to these expos. Oh, you got to be here. You got to do these things. And at one point, I stopped. But here's the tale of the tape. And I shared this with Michael. Is that over the years, I have sold more franchises for AmSpirit Business Connections than franchise brokers have. The hundreds of franchise brokers that I've dealt with, it's a 10-to-1 margin. Me, all by myself, have networked into, I should say, and working through franchise consultants, I've only sold one. And it's a little embarrassing to share this story, because there's a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted money, going to these expos, hauling all your stuff all the way across country to get to Vegas, getting it all set up, staying in a hotel, I get it. It's all part of it. You got to spend money to make money, but you've got to. It's not just spending the money, it's spending the money in the right places. And that wasn't the right place. Just like Michael's story. I would get an audience with a franchise consultant and, how many have you sold, kid? Tell me about your ROI, so on and so forth. And it's like, you're asking me these questions and I'm doing my best to answer, but I question whether a lot of these franchise consultants were successful themselves. You start talking to these people and what their paths were, and that's neither here nor there, right? The point is that I had a similar experience to what Michael Roderick had. Is that here's another franchise broker for you to connect with. wow, great, and then you just you realize in time, well, it's going nowhere. They're asking me the same questions. Yeah, I'll keep you in mind. And then you talk to them 3 months later, and they don't remember the prior conversation. They don't remember everything you shared about about your franchise. They're talking to 6 different franchisors every day. They're not keeping anything straight. Um, and they probably have 2 or 3 brands that they're really trying to push, and the rest of us are, you know, just they forget about us. And it's probably the same thing with Broadway investors. They're investing in they're investing in the can't miss shows. Who's the producer out there that always has the hits? I guess where I'm going to put my money. Newbies, I'm not taking a chance. And so what I found is that I just became the best. I became the best advocate for my brand, and just doing it my way and networking. And so the lesson in all of this for all of us, and I'll read a part of this newsletter. It's relatively short. Quote: there were investors all around me. They were just hidden in the events that were outside the industry. Uh, Unless you think I'm just providing clues here on finding investors, this applies across the board. Everything you're trying to accomplish right now can happen significantly faster if a person of influence supports it in some way. But more often than not, that person is not where you think they would be. So my challenge for you today is to take a moment to ask yourself who outside your industry might be able to help and reach out. Who can you reach out to? Um, and there's a lot of truth to this. I talk to a lot of mortgage lenders who are like, I'll just pick on that industry right now. Mortgage lenders, I need to meet realtors. Yep, just connect me to realtors. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It does. I mean, it's obvious. Who is helping people sell houses? Who would know more than anybody as to who's buying a house in need of a mortgage? Would be a real estate investor, or excuse me, a realtor. The problem is that all the mortgage lenders are doing that. All the realtors are just besieged by mortgage lenders. Keep me in mind, keep me in mind, keep me in mind. And there can only be one mortgage on every house. And so, not everybody can benefit from realtors. And I'm sure realtors spread the wealth, but that strategy can't work for everybody. And so I see mortgage lenders out there that become successful other ways, doing other things. Working outside the box a little bit. So that's really what Michael's saying here is that you need to look outside the box to be successful. It's so easy to stop and say, okay, here's the obvious solution for me. And I'm here to tell you that oftentimes the obvious solution is the toughest path to go. It's not easy. A lot of people are doing it. A lot of people are pursuing them. They can kind of have their pick, just like the Broadway investors. They can have their pick of the shows. Lots of shows going on. Just because I'm an investor doesn't mean I'm going to invest in anything and everything. I'm going to invest the ones that are a sure thing. I'm not going to take a risk. So they're not the people to go after. And for me, when I stopped trying to network through franchise brokers and franchise consultants, I became so much more successful. My numbers grew. The number of people that I talked to's grown. The number of people who've become franchisees has grown. I'm just networking in other places. So when I say I sold them, I didn't. But I'm networking with other people, non-franchise, people who aren't franchise brokers. People are willing to give me the time of day and ask real questions about the franchise opportunity. All franchise brokers would ever ask is, how much money can someone make? Well, I don't know. I know what I make, and I'm not really supposed to. I don't make an earnings claim. It's just kind of a legal term. But that wasn't really. Those weren't really the important questions. The important questions that the people that I was networking through were just questions along is it fun? Is there joy in it? What's the exciting thing about it? So just to sum this all up, the obvious connections tend to be really disappointing. But the ones that are a little more obscure, the people you wouldn't think would be a good person to connect with, those are the ones that can be really fruitful.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.